First, I'd like to introduce Adriana Zaluka. She's a new member of the Larry Krauss Family Office Tech-NEW-logy Institute and a founder of MyFotech, which is a research and events-based network that aims to help single and multi-family office professionals simplify decisions around operations technology. Adriana, just introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Adriana. Welcome today. Good morning to most of you. Good afternoon to some, including myself. I'm joining from Spain. Just wanted to say thank you to Phil again for our collaboration. We will have this video on our website as well. We have some of the previous videos too. If you would like to access them, then please register. Just to say that we're also going to have a conference in November. So more information on that coming soon. And I hope to see everyone there. And lastly, I look forward, obviously, to today to hearing about some of the innovation happening in this space. So thank you.
So let me introduce Raymond DiNunzio, my friend, who spends his time focusing on digital transformation and technology applications for family offices. He's one of the founders and overseers of TAS Advisors, where he leads a firm that provides cutting-edge family office infrastructure services in a wholly digital environment as a service. With a background in the financial sector and expertise in emerging technologies, Raymond brings a depth of knowledge to his role as board advisor and technology tester for many organizations. And when I have a question, I call Ray. He always has the answer, or the person that has the answer. So Ray, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Phil, thank you so much. That's super kind. And what a nice introduction. I need to give a shout out to my buddy on here, Joe Lariza, because working with Joe Lariza, I think before Mirador, and my buddy John Strauss, when I was at Fall Line Securities, it's now New Edge. Joe put me down this rabbit hole that started our company, TOS. So big shout out to Joe for helping me with my curiosity, and thank everybody for being on here. It's an honor to be with you guys. One of the things that we do at our shop is really want to collaborate with innovative and new emerging technologies. We spend a lot of time with venture firms, venture-backed emerging technology firms, portfolio companies. We test a lot of things with live data. And what we want to do and what we try and curate is a really innovative, curious organization that's adopting as much new and vibrant technology as possible. To that end, over the past couple of years, I've gotten to know both Adam and Rashad, working really closely with them as organizations, thinking about their technology and applications, helping them with testing, running data through them, and really connecting them to the ecosystem. And I think everybody here is going to really enjoy meeting both of these folks, learning about their backgrounds and a lot about what they've accomplished with their firms over the past couple of years and what the roadmap looks like moving forward. So with that, Adam, if you wouldn't mind, why don't you give us a little bit about your background from an introduction standpoint, and then Rashad, pick up from there if you don't mind.
Sure, and thank you very much, Ray. Thanks for the opportunity to come along today, and thanks to Phil and Adriana too, and obviously everybody who's dialed in. And so very quickly, Asora is family office software set up by myself and another co-founder. The other co-founder is the technical side. He's the CTO. My own background, I trained as an accountant, worked as a private client tax advisor, became a chartered financial analyst, worked as an investment analyst, spent most of my career as a wealth advisor. And the reason for the background, I think one of the particular challenges in family office is that the investment, the tax, the financial reporting all comes together. And that's maybe one of the reasons why it makes it particularly challenging, but an area that we thought that in setting up Asora we could help with.
Thanks, Adam. Rashad.
Yep. Hi, everybody. Very nice to meet you. Thank you, Ray and Bill and everybody who's organizing this call and everybody for joining. I'm Rashad Kurbanov, CEO and co-founder of iownit. My background prior to starting iownit has been in the financial services, in capital markets, mostly on the institutional side. I've never been a trader, never been an investment banker, but always focused on bringing the technology into the creating kind of capital markets infrastructure. I can claim that, when I started on the trading floor of SBC Warburg, we still wrote paper tickets. There were still such things as fax machines to send the instructions, etc. And through my career, I've seen kind of all of those old technologies disappear and markets become a lot more efficient. So what we're focusing at iownit is really kind of building the digital infrastructure for alternative markets. And through the conversation, we'll talk about specifically what we're doing, kind of how we do it. And for us, really, the focus is on kind of the technologies. I think part of the conversation here is going to focus on the technology, emerging tech, and the impact on the markets. So we're leveraging distributed ledger or blockchain technology to really streamline the alternative markets and reduce the cost, reduce the friction, and just really facilitate the transaction flows between all the market participants. So,
great, thank you. So, Adam, tell us a little bit more about Asora and the problems that you're solving, if you wouldn't mind. Kind of, you started the company a few years back. We understand that. I understand that well. Maybe go into a little bit of that. That would be helpful, I think.
Yeah, we've been around for about 3.5 years now. The first 2 years of our existence, we were part of a multi-family office. The reason we wanted to build the software from day one with actual customers, and maybe before that, why did we set it up? And it is a crowded space. I'm sure many members of our audience today, look at family office software. There are a lot of family office software applications out there. So why did we set another one up, and why should it be considered? When we looked at the problem, as an advisor working with families, wealthy individuals and wealthy families, and generally the wealthier they got, the bigger the problem was. There was no management information system. There was no data. And as an advisor, you ask all these questions, and it opened up the fact that it was really hard to get the data, get the information. And that causes lots of problems. That causes inefficiencies, causes security risks, and ultimately it's a hindrance to making decisions. So we set up Asora really to provide that single source of truth. And we can talk about some of the other solutions and why we think maybe they aren't heading on it, and why we're very focused on providing that single source of truth in the family office, and why we think that's the critical pillar that will help them embrace all sorts of technology going forward.
We're going to dig in there, man. There's a lot of competition. Rashad, if you wouldn't mind, help us out a little bit. How did you guys come about putting iownit together, and what were you trying to solve when you did?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I mean, obviously, I'd love to claim that we had the foresight to understand the growth of the alternative markets and the impact of the technology, etc. when we started. But in truth, the origins of the company is more of just a conversation between two friends. So my co-founder is a friend. I've known him for 30 years. And one day he called me up and said, look, you're in this tech operations and capital markets. Explain me one thing, right? My bankers have put me into this private equity fund. The fund has done reasonably well. I'm trying to get out of that position now because I need some liquidity, rebalancing my portfolio. And I really can't do anything with this thing. It's just kind of sitting there, and the bankers are offering to take it off my hands at 40% haircut. Whoever the bankers are, let them remain nameless. And I said, why is it that if I go and have mutual fund, stock, ETF, or anything else, I can just press the button and just trade out of the position, get the cash in my account in a day? And in the private equity, I mean, this fund is doing great. I can't get my money out, and actually, if I sell it, I'm going to end up losing a bunch of money. And that kind of led to the conversation about, okay, let's actually look into it. Think about the market, think about kind of the growth, etc. Why are those issues there? And that led us, kind of over a period of, I think we've been in existence for 5.5 years, really start to dig into the market, particularly the alternative market. And what we realized fairly early in our, kind of journey, that there is a structural issue in terms of the market. Unlike, maybe the market that Adam is focusing on, the infrastructure part of the alternative market was largely untapped. There has been really very little development in that space. So we decided to be brave and kind of tackle that market, build a technology to solve, that small issue that we faced, or my co-founder faced, but really kind of solve it broadly for the market, across all of the market participants.
There's a lot of work there.
Yep.
Hey, Adam, when you think about your landscape and your competitors, like how do you differentiate in what appears to be a pretty crowded space that keeps getting more and more crowded, right? You've got really solid incumbents like Adapar, you've got Mastro, Eton, Private Wealth Solutions, Allview, Asset Vantage, Canopy. I mean, it just seems like there's so much going on in this tech space all the time. How's Asora different? And how do you view the world differently that you think than your competitors?
Yeah, there's probably two parts to that. But the first observation would be we don't necessarily want to compete with everybody. And I think that's part of the challenge. There is no magical solution. And maybe as a software provider, I should be saying I have the magical solution, but I think there's probably enough wisdom on this call to realize that there is no silver bullet solution. And I think when we talk to customers, that's one of the frustrations, that when they do a review of the marketplace, and many family offices, they do a review, and if they do adopt it, there tends to be disappointment, and a lot don't end up adopting the new solution, because there is no single solution that's going to do everything. So there's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of applications. Where we make ourselves somewhat different is we're open architecture. So our view of what the family office needs, they will have more than one application in the future. They'll always have Excel, but more than just Excel. And they need those applications to connect and talk to each other. So when we set up, we want to be that single source of truth. We want to be that place where the family knows all of their information is captured accurately. But as much as, and we have our own application there, and we can talk about how we build our application there, we think it's critical that we make ourselves open and able to integrate to other systems. And that way, because if we have that data, there will be, not just now, there will be more applications, there'll be more innovation. Obviously, on Rashad's side, there's going to be more innovation in getting data into a family office as people innovate. There'll be more solutions with AI taking the data out, doing analysis on it. And the key to that is that it comes back into that single database. So we're somewhat different than a lot of our competitors, I think, that operate a much more closed approach and make it much harder for people to access the information.
Got it. Rashad, can you help us understand a little bit about more the path and the road that iownit is on and what you're solving for? If you wouldn't mind. I know the alternative investment space is so massive, and the prediction of it is just to grow exponentially. How are you positioned in that, and what do you solve for?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, Ray, you hinted at, the growth of the market. There's plenty of research these days that talks about the growth of alternatives, specifically if we focus on kind of the high net worth, ultra high net worth market, right? I mean, alternatives have been a mainstay of institutional investing for decades, right? Whether it's the sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, et cetera, they've been always allocated a significant amount of capital to private equity, private real estate, private credit, et cetera. But I think, specifically in the last 3-5 years, there's been increasing attention both from the GPs and the wealth management community on providing access to alternatives to the high net worth, ultra high net worth individuals, the ones that qualify under the current regulations, right? Let's just kind of be very, very clear about that. There's an interesting paper that came out recently from Bain, the consulting firm that estimates the kind of the target addressable market, so additional flow that can go into alternatives, somewhere between $5 to $12 trillion in terms of the investable assets, and the numbers are very, very large, right? So it's a very big, growing, and I think increasingly important market for all market participants. I think when we look at kind of what we do, building on kind of what Adam said, in the alternative markets, there is really, we don't believe there's going to be one solution that addresses all the aspects of the alternatives, from research, due diligence, portfolio construction. I mean, there's so many things that go into making an investment decision, making the capital allocation. So there are always going to be kind of players in that space. And what we decided and what we've been focusing for the past 5 years is, like, once all of those decisions are made, and you're actually ready to commit and make an investment in a particular fund or particular, financial instrument, is how do you make that transaction, right? Like, how do you go through what is the infrastructure and the pipes that are being used to process those transactions. In today's world, most of those transactions, and many of you guys on the call here probably have experienced it, right? They involve lengthy paperwork, right? You get a lot of subscription documents. You have to initial here, do this, do that. DocuSign certainly helped, right? So let's not kind of deny it, right? But by and large, everything is still done very manually, and then from there, it's kind of the implication of receiving capital calls or receiving reports. A lot of it is very bespoke point to point. In some ways, making Adam's job slightly more difficult, right? Because they need to ingest all that data and put in their systems, and there's really kind of no standards. And if we switch our attention into the public markets, right? So whether it's stocks, bonds, mutual funds, kind of any financial instrument, even over-the-counter derivatives like swaps, everything works just, with a click of a button, right? Like no one has seen an application form or anything for mutual fund purchase, for example, right? So what we're focused on is like, how do you create the infrastructure and facilitate the transaction flow from the investor side, whether they're coming through wealth advisor, broker dealer, direct, to the GP asset managers, to the fund administrators? How do you actually manage that transaction flow, connect all the parties, and enable what we'll call the straight-through processing of the alternatives, so that once the decision is made, kind of cutting the time from the decision to the execution and really making that process efficient. And in effect, removing the significant operational administrative overhead associated with alternatives, right? I mean, in the context of the family office that is managing significant capital, those overheads can be absorbed, right? Because there's, kind of sufficiently big asset base, et cetera. But once you start moving into the high net worth and ultra high net worth market, the operational cost of accessing alternatives make that as an asset class prohibitive for many investors, right? Because, if you look at, kind of your cost, purely the transaction cost of investing in different asset classes versus alternatives, even if there are better returns, the operational costs just simply negate that and make it more complex, right? And add on top of that the problems with liquidity and the reporting and all of that. So what we're focused on is really kind of building that infrastructure for alternatives. Think of us almost like, probably the best metaphor that I can think of, Visa network, right? So Visa is a great business because they don't issue credit, they don't make credit decisions, they don't issue credit cards, they're actually not facilitating the sales at stores. What they do is they provide the pipes that enables banks and their customers and the merchants and their banks to transact and move money kind of between the parties in a seamless way. So when we go to the store today and swipe a credit card, the machine spins and in 2 seconds it says approved or declined, right, as it might be, right? All of that actually happens through Visa network. So our goal is to, not necessarily with money, right, but when it comes to the alternatives, provide that kind of infrastructure so that when somebody is making an investment decision, they can process that transaction in a very short period of time rather than be faced with the fairly daunting task of completing lots of paperwork and then just simply give up halfway and say, this is just not worth it for me.
Got it. All right. There's a lot to unpack there. We're going to have to come back to that.
Yep.
Hey, Adam, with you being in such a crowded marketplace, help us understand, help the audience understand what's unique about your approach and what problems that you're addressing or solving that you think are gaps that your peer firms are not.
Yeah. I think that the first thing, there's probably a first wave of family office software that was primarily about consolidated reporting. And ultimately, the output of the product, as it were, was a very long PDF with lots of charts, lots of tables that could be generated from the system. And I'd say that was wave one, and that consolidated. And the key players in that market, the family offices probably dropped a little bit down their target market, and they've started to provide that investment reporting solution to wealth managers, investment managers, banks, and so on. So it solved a problem, but it was quite a specific problem. Our approach is quite different. Rather than a reporting platform, we view it as an operating platform. And that's why, as an operating platform, the three things that are different. The first is the focus on data. We want to be that single. We think the family office needs that single source of truth. So we want to capture everything, every private asset, every entity, every person, all the structure, all the details, all the assets in one place. So it's that level of coverage that we're focused on. And it's not really from an investment liquid portfolio and add some private asset. It's starting with that mindset first. Along with that is being open architecture, right, which is different. So that data needs to be used by different people. And getting more practical in that, that means you've got accountants in there who will need that information to be able to do annual reports, tax statements, and you'll need the investment team in there to be able to assess it. So it should be able to support both of those. So everybody's working off it. The third piece that's different is, and it is this concept of an operating platform versus a reporting platform. Most of the software that we think our competitors have given, it's not really day-to-day family office software. And we're very focused on looking at what activities are done in a family office on a day-to-day basis and how we can use software and technology to solve them. This is simple things like tracking documents, making it easy to find them, attaching a note to a file, a digital file, so it can be seen by anybody, assigning tasks. We recently added pipeline functionality, so cradle to grave, so private assets. So feedback from our customers was a huge amount, is tracking deal flow that's coming into the family office, having a process around where that is, who's approved it, this sort of functionality. So we're very focused, excuse me, on the operating side. And we think that's somewhat different. So, to recap, data first rather than the magic application first, because we think that's going to evolve. Open architecture as opposed to closed. And when it comes to our application, actual operating software that can help the family office on a day-to-day basis.
So that's really important. Like, we think about that neurotically at our shop, workflow automation, right? Fingers off keyboards, eliminate undifferentiated heavy lifting, right? Get rid of it. So, but what I heard in there too, are you, we think about the world in two ways, a county book of record and an investment book of record, and they kind of match up once a year, right? January 1, on or around January 1, they match. Other than that, they don't. Are you sitting on both sides of that then? Are you trying to work into both the accounting book of record and the investment book of record?
And this is a little bit where being both the CFA and a chartered or qualified accountant comes in. We understand both sides of that requirement. I think where we want to be is we want to be one entry point into the family office for the data. And then I think we will never be a full accounting application, and that's when we're open. But we want to make it as easy as possible to reroute that data in and to sync up across the two. I mean, look, we think that the accounting application will ultimately probably be a Sage Intacct, a Xero, QuickBooks, whatever it might be. And what we need to do is bring that together. Some of the problems we're seeing at the minute is as automation solutions come for data feeds, the worst scenario is that the family office ends up with two data feeds from the same source into its two applications, right? So it's got data automatically going in over here. And we're adding Canoe to the platform later next month. And that data will come in and be able to go out to the general ledger. Now, we can talk about the general ledger piece. It's a whole subject in its own right about how you create those integrations. But our view is everything into the single database, Asora data, and from us across.
Thanks. Rashad, from a practical application standpoint and where your roadmap's going, one thing that you mentioned on the last point that you brought up that I want to address, and then let's talk about sort of how this works, how it actually works when in an application. One of the things that we think about a lot in family office world is like, and one of the things I thought about a lot when I was at UBS is like, what's the operational cost to process an actual investment, right? And so at UBS, that was like a real problem because we had so many rejected documents and paperwork and subscription agreements and were killing the alternative investment department. Like they couldn't put enough staff into place, right? They couldn't. And they ended up manually managing everything in a large Excel spreadsheet and sending that to the asset managers for everything from tenders to distributions. And it was just an atrocious process. Like, how does it work on the inside?
Yeah, I mean, look, you're absolutely right. I mean, the operational cost is quite high, right? I mean, we kind of did a quick study, back of the envelope calculations. And on average, when you talk about whether it's an RIA, broker-dealer, wirehouse like UBS, the average cost per subscription, just kind of cost per trade, is probably about $1,000, right? When you think about it, when you add up all the costs and everything else. And really the vast majority of that time, or the cost, the operational cost, stems from one party trying to get the data out to the other party and confirm that the other party got the data, right? So I have an investor, here's their name, address, how much they're investing, etc., qualifications. I need to take that data from my organization and deliver it to somebody else. Today, in today's world, Excel, PDF, point-to-point file exchanges, I mean, you name it, people do it, right? Including, kind of emailing, signed subscription documents back and forth. So what we've done is that, look, if we leave aside kind of all of the pre-trade stuff that happens and really start focusing from the moment when the trade is done, kind of subscription is executed, etc., what does it take to get the data from point A to point B, right? Very, very quickly. And to us, the answer is like, well, rather than trying to figure out, how to build more efficient point-to-point connections or send a PDF and automate kind of the workflows you talked about, like take that PDF and use OCR, optical character recognition, parse it out and put it into some sort of other database, why don't we create a shared ledger, right? And the shared ledger, distributed ledger's nature is an ability to have access to the data by authorized parties, right? Just create the shared ledger and have all the parties access that data directly themselves, and then create a set of APIs and the connection points in between. And that was, even though it sounds simple, right? Just to kind of say, look, rather than just trying to exchange the data bi-directional between the parties, create kind of one centralized, I will call, but at the same time, decentralized data store. That change in the approach actually then allows us to say, yep, okay, now rather than trying to figure out how do I get the data from one party to another and I have multiple relationships and multiple connections, etc., now all I have to do as participant in this network is be able to write and read from the shared ledger. And I know that the data that sits on that ledger is going to be secure, immutable, kind of provided, verified, etc. And now all of a sudden you kind of change the paradigm in terms of the operational processing. You no longer need to think about how do I get the data to somebody and verify that data and just make sure that they got it and they loaded it in and etc. The only thing you focus on is like, I'm going to get the data into the system and I'm going to expect a confirmation to come back from the other side that they retrieved the data and loaded it into their systems, right? So at a high level, that's what we're focused on. It's like, how do you create a shared infrastructure accessible to everybody? It's not quite open architecture, right? So we're using private permission ledger, right? Just to be very clear, this is not cryptocurrency. This is not kind of the public blockchain space, right? Just want to be very, very clear about that. But it enables then to kind of redesign and rethink the operational process, not only around the subscription and the initial investment process, but then the asset servicing, whether it's the tenders, whether it's the capital calls, whether it's distributions, redemptions, whatever. You now have a mechanism to exchange the data between the counterparties and manage the transaction flow much more efficiently. So, our estimates is that once you do that, the operational cost can go down 90 to 95% in some instances through kind of complete automation of all of the back office and some of the middle office process flows.
That's exciting. For those of you who have not seen it, there's a really good recent piece out by Bain. Thomas Olson and a team of folks put that together that covers a lot of this ground and a lot of the challenges. And I think you guys have been living in that for the past 3 years. So Adam, what does your roadmap look like for you at Asora right now, and the right type of client, where you're going, where you guys are seeing adoption, and why you're seeing adoption, if you don't mind?
We're seeing pretty broad spread from Australia through Asia. Recently onboarded a Thai family across Europe into North America. So we're seeing a lot of adoption. And what we've found as we've gone across these different markets, the problem's the same. And when we speak to people, it's the same core problem, that there's usually an Excel doc or a large part of Excel-based operations reporting. What's interesting for us and where we focus on the roadmap, maybe to put a little bit of color on it, right? So when we talk about open architecture, we integrate to Bloomberg Refinitiv FactSet. So if you want to do really detailed analysis on liquid investments, we'll just pump your data straight into those. And you can do it there because they have all the data on the underlying markets. So our focus has been very much now on private assets, the processes around private assets, workflows around private assets, being able to track them, being able to benchmark them, to be able to approve them. So we see that is a big time drain and if we go into our roadmap with the pipeline, we will be moving into a deal flow. So allowing families that are on platform to share deals amongst each other. So being able to collaborate within that environment. So that's a core area. That private assets is a core area. The second area is to keep building the integrations on the data side. So we use Plaid, use Salt Edge, going live with Canoe, hopefully not too long after with Arch Labs. We enrich then through third-party databases, but we see that enrichment with third-party databases, Crunchbase, places like that once we have the data for the family and what they own, we can start to enrich and automate that intelligence piece. And the third strand of the roadmap, and this is looking a little bit further ahead, but one of the areas when we look at the application layer as well as the operating is really engagement of the next generation. And back to that, insofar as the technology solution for family office has materialized into the large PDF document, we think the next generation is going to have a lot different requirement as to how they consume the information and what's going on in the family office. So we're very focused on mobile, what that experience looks like, and how you can really engage that next generation.
How are you enriching data and alternatives in that space? Our friend Sean Parkin down in Perth put out a piece this morning about Burgess and MSCI yesterday with their final acquisition of the Burgess platform. That's a big sort of problem and pain point for us in family offices.
Yeah, it's hard, and different people are coming at it. So obviously you've got really intelligent databases like Crunchbase and PitchBook, but that data is over here, and then the family's data is here. We've looked at both of those and integrating to them. You have the providers like Canoe that realize that not just should they pull the data from the underlying manager, but they should offer the ability to give it to you enriched. So I think there's going to be some different options for that, for enriching that information. I think what's interesting, linking to the last bit, where we see the next generation, they're much more engaged maybe around private assets, the story of private assets, what's going on. So simple things like including logos, having a nice digital interface, having news flow, things like that on the platform, so they can access and understand, well, what actual investments are being made, what are those companies doing, how can they get insight to it. So I think it's a combination of third party, some of the existing pipes we have, some of it will be putting data into the system, but the output then will be a very rich experience around reporting around private assets, which have typically suffered.
Got it. Thanks. That's helpful. Hey, so Rashad, tell us about adoption for not only iownit, but people in your space. Like if I think of peers in your space, or at least people that I think are trying to approach alternatives with blockchain, I think of Figure, I think of some of the different providers out in the marketplace. How do you guys get adoption? It kind of feels like the chicken and the egg.
It's a great question, Ray. And one thing I want to kind of differentiate a little bit versus some of the firms that you mentioned is what we actually do versus kind of those firms that you mentioned. We view ourselves as an enabling technology, right? Meaning that we're actually not looking to build a distribution network or direct to consumer, be the product manufacturers or anything of that sort, right? So we typically work with the GPs, like large GPs, wealth managers, custodians, fund administrators, and we provide the infrastructure to enable them to run their operations more efficiently, right? So, and that is kind of a very specific position that we've taken in the market as the niche that we want to be in, and we want to kind of own that space and really focus on building out kind of center of excellence, if I can call it, and provide the technology that enables the market participants to kind of run their business better, right? I think if I look at some of the other firms, what their focus seems to be, right, and again, this is from kind of the outside observer, is that they're trying to focus on building out a distribution network, let's say, for alternatives, right? Which is to say, look, we can leverage the technology, whether it's tokenization, whether it's something else, and really take the alternatives as a product category and go direct to consumer. Because, for us, that's kind of how we see the market evolving. We're going to go direct to consumer, and given our technical expertise, we have a leg up over the established incumbent players in the market, kind of large financial services institutions. I think that's a difficult journey to go, right? Because in some ways, the question that you're asking is adoption. Adoption of technology is often pretty simple, right? Because, if the technology does what it does, and there's a real challenge that you as an organization face, you're probably going to get to the point where the pain is too high and you're just going to say, look, we just need to adopt the technology. So we're seeing actually pretty great traction for us in terms of the way that we're positioning, because with the clients that we're working with, it's not the question of adoption of alternatives. Alternatives are already part of their investment process. They just need to grow it more, and we're removing the barriers for them to make it available to a broader audience of investors. Whereas if we look at some of the other firms, the question is really not the adoption of technology, but the adoption of the business model, which is, can you sell an alternative product direct to consumer? And that, I think, is a difficult one to envision, because most of the high net worth, ultra high net worth individuals in the private wealth channel typically work with the financial advisors, right? So typically you kind of need to look at your investments as a part of the broader portfolio. And just simply saying, look, we have this technology, so we're going to try to change the market dynamics by, kind of peeling off and, kind of going direct to consumer. I think that's where the adoption challenges rise. And I don't want to, that in many ways confuses the matter of saying adoption of technology versus adoption of the business model. And the technology is easy to adopt if the business model is the sound that is behind it, right? So we're not seeing any, look, it's not walk in the park, right? We're not kind of get greeted every time we walk in the door. Nobody says, where have you guys been all my life, right? So there is an element of selling and engaging and communicating and explaining the business value, etc. But once we get through that, it becomes very, very easy for us to have a conversation on, look, you already do this. You're just going to do it much more efficiently. And because you do it much more efficiently, you can do much more of that, right? That's the conversation for us.
So I know a thing or two about iownit. I've heard the story a lot. So let me dig in on one component here. On the operational side, from my old days at UBS, the operational experience for the client and the employee, the current environment, we know how it works. Or if you don't, on the system, the asset management firm creates a product with someone like UBS, and then it works its way through this entire system with an awful lot of cholesterol, an awful lot of paperwork, subscription agreements, stapling trust documents to it. How does that change, that current state? What does that state feel like with the adoption of technology like iownit?
So there are two parts to the answer there, right? One is kind of the technology part, right? Kind of how do you exchange that information? And second is the standardization of the data itself, right? So the problem that you're describing stems from a mere fact that absent a standard, most GPs or wealth managers or whoever are just going to invent their own process, right? So they're going to say, okay, we're going to find an optimal solution for ourselves, but in many ways it's going to be a suboptimal solution for, kind of if you look in the broader context. So that's where you have a situation where now you have a subscription document that somebody has created, and they've requested 15 different documents that need to be stapled. And there's a file, and there's a whole process of I'm going to email this person is going to email that person, and it's just it's going to go in cycles. So that process gets designed because faced with the challenges like, okay, I need to get this done, I need to get this product out to my clients, you have to put something in place. And even though it's not optimal, it doesn't cost the right amount, right? You still put it in place and you kind of go. So what we do and what we focus on is kind of addressing both of those challenges, right? So the first one is, okay, you don't actually need to design a process that is specific to each kind of your counterparty. We actually bring you a technology in the process that can support the asset through its life cycle, from the subscription all the way through kind of maintenance of that asset lifecycle, quarterly reporting and capital calls and everything else, all in a very nice standardized format. So now you, as a, let's say wealth management firm or GP or a fund administrator, don't need to think about like, how do I integrate with X, Y, and Z? If you integrate with us, we'll make sure that all of these things that you do will actually end up in the right way on the other side, right? So there's an element of kind of transaction management and having a process, right, that is supported by the technology. And the second part is the standardization around the data, right? So a lot of times it's exactly the same question asked in 5 or 6 or 7 or 15 different ways by 15 different parties. So the part of what we're doing is we're saying, well, let's actually standardize on a specific data model so we can actually then enhance the way the communication is done, the data is exchanged, and there's no loss of content, right? But there is an improvement in the way you communicate the data. I don't think we're going to, I'm not going to claim that there's going to be kind of removal of the need to staple the trust document, right, to a subscription. I mean, that's a regulatory requirement, that's a legal requirement, fine, fair enough. It's just that part of staple that we're changing, meaning that you don't actually have to attach it to an email and send it. We'll be able to grab it from your systems, attach it to the transaction and pass it on to the right counterparty and ensure the delivery of that document into the right place.
That's awesome. Hey, Adam. So, for the most part, there's a lot of professionals on here that deal with a lot of family offices. The most common technology in a family office, I think, still to this day, August of 2023, is Excel and QuickBooks, right? When people are embracing you and looking into Asora, are they coming off those? Are they frustrated with other technologies? Where are you seeing the most adoption?
Yes. And the spreadsheet from hell that most family offices have, which becomes their single source of truth. It's somewhere where they record everything and it powers reporting. So that is the biggest driver of people who come onto our platform, is that they actually want to stop having a spreadsheet as the one place where everything's tracked outside of other systems. So that's a major driver. And the data, and coming with that is the data, right? Having all of the data in place and then data automation, getting it in and having the tools, which is, we're very open as to how we can use third-party tools to automate that data process. So that's definitely driving it in. And I'd probably say, Ray, conceptually, we had a conversation, and very early when I talked to you, I talked to other people who are consultants. They get the data problem, the open architecture is the approach. That's what you guys believe strongly in, as well as us. I think, and for the people who are on the call today, the biggest challenge, because people are on this call because they want to find what's new technology, what's going to change, how can they innovate? And the biggest challenge, if your database in your family office is either an Excel or a system that's a closed system, you can't innovate, right? Like that's the single answer. And I suppose, we don't have a 20-year history of building an application with maybe some of the depth and some of the different areas that others have. But I think that the people who come to us realize that we're going to solve the data problem and position them for the long run, not to get locked, not a vendor lock-in issue where my data is stuck with a provider that then becomes obsolete in 5 years' time, gets me off the Excel today. And I think that's the space that we operate in most and get most traction with.
That's super helpful. Something we're getting more and more questions on, right? There was this finally getting people off servers and they could go into the cloud, and we still beat people on that. They're like, they have to have it on their server. And I'm like, just get an Abacus, right? That'll be more helpful. But so who owns the data? Like, we're getting more and more questions now from clients on, they want the data. They don't want it sitting in a database at some other provider. And we're seeing a lot more discussion and moving into data lake and things for clients and the opportunity for them to have that warehouse. How does it work with Asora?
Yeah, and that question for us, because we want to hold everything, that question becomes top of mind for clients, right? Because you're literally going to be all of my data in one place. So practically, how does it work? You have your own dedicated private cloud in Microsoft Azure. You get a structured database to capture all the information. You get a document database. You get inbuilt connectivity with it. So the idea basically is you're launching that data lake, your own private data lake with Microsoft Azure. You're getting these services like Plaid and SaltEdge and Canoe and our own direct connections to custodian that can pipe data into that, as well as being private cloud, which means that your data is separate from any other client of Asora or anybody else in Microsoft Azure. You also get always on encryption, so that if anybody accesses it, it's gobbledygook unless they've got the encryption key. And then mostly we try to drive engagement through the web app and the mobile app. So now all your data is in one single place. In terms of where it is in Microsoft Azure, it can be in any Azure cloud instance, right? And you get into debates about, mostly that's in Europe. People like the rules, the laws in Europe and around data protection. But effectively, I think if you look at it, people are either caught between maybe something isn't a server, maybe they're using Microsoft 365, and actually, rather than on a OneDrive or SharePoint, the safest place is to go direct to Microsoft, get your own dedicated, which we basically facilitate, your own dedicated cloud with all the securities that Microsoft Azure can provide, and then put all your data in there.
Got it. That's helpful, and that's directionally where people want to go. Rashad, so I get the client experience. I think, the simplicity and the elegance of it from an advisor's experience. I think what's really fascinating for things like iownit and what you can deliver into the market is sort of the democratization of access to alternatives, right? So somebody that has $500,000 to express exposure isn't sitting in a fund of funds with a lot of expenses, right? So from that growth and where things are moving, what happens from the asset management side of things, and how small can it go to a client to get an express exposure? And then also maybe from an economic standpoint, right? Because if you think about trying to express a $250,000 position today, your options are a fund of funds or a feeder fund structure, which many consider cost prohibitive.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think democratization is what we focus on, and frankly, all the market participants are looking for, right? It's like, how do we expand the access, particularly in the private wealth channel? The focus is still very much kind of in the US, with some, kind of developing in Asia. I think Europe is an interesting one. We'll see kind of how that market develops. So in terms of, to your first question, how low can it go, right? In terms of the minimum investments, look, ultimately, there is no lower bound, right? And what's interesting is, like, if we look in the public markets, and I'll just kind of start with that. When I started at SBC Warburg, we actually had to learn about, so quote unquote odd lots, right? And the only thing that traded in odd lots was, I think, Berkshire Hathaway, because the price was just so big that people would bought 2 shares, 3 shares, etc. Everybody traded in round lots of 100 shares. And there was a whole kind of mechanic built around that, how do you handle that, etc. Fast forward 20 years to today, I don't think anybody cares about odd lots. I don't think anybody trades in 100 share minimum lots, etc. And in fact, many firms just kind of stopped worrying about having their share price to be anywhere from $20 to $40 to make it attractive as a round lot and whatever else. Like, all of that has gone out of the window, right? You can buy 3 shares, you can buy fractional shares, you can invest $5 in Amazon, right? Whatever, right? So there is really no minimum to speak of. And the reason why those things were there in the first place was because of the cost that actually went into processing those transactions. And as the transaction cost went down with the innovation and the technology, many of the assumptions just kind of went away, right? So when we look in the alternative space, look, I mean, does it make sense to invest $25 into a private equity fund? Probably not, right? It's just kind of conceptually, it doesn't make sense, right? But $25,000 as a part of a diversified portfolio, yeah, absolutely. So you can take that $250,000 investment, right, that let's say an individual can make, and you can give them a fairly diversified set of private assets, so mix of private credit, private real estate. Anybody can construct in the portfolio, etc., and execute that transaction because the operational cost of support actually goes down, right? And then over time, you can think about it and say, okay, where does it go, and kind of how does it evolve? I mean, do we start thinking about separately managed accounts? Do we start thinking about integration of those into kind of broader portfolio constructions, rebalancing, right, etc. So I believe that the market, we're like in the very early innings of the evolution of alternatives in the private wealth channel. And I think the democratization is the name of the game. And, frankly, it's just going to grow, right, over time. So hopefully that answers your question. I don't know. It's that's at least my view.
Yeah, I think I see the opportunity side from constraints, right? Whether you're in a 3C7 product or you've got slot issues, right? Because if I understand correctly, you can almost go more towards an omnibus relationship as well, right? So that from the asset manager side of things, I'm not worried about communicating to somebody with $10,000.
Yeah, and actually, Ray, I mean, the question that we ask from from folks, right, particularly the ones that say, look, I'm worried about the number of LPs that I have in my fund because we may not be able to support them. But once you kind of get to the bottom of it, you can actually say, look, if we give you the technology to make your communication much more efficient, so you don't have to, quote unquote, pick up the phone and call each person or email them something, etc., you can actually distribute your information much more efficiently through the intermediaries that have that connection to the client. All of a sudden, the number of investors becomes kind of irrelevant, right? Meaning, like, if you can manage one capital call, you can manage 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000, whatever the number is, right? So removing that volume sensitivity through integration and the technology is what enables, kind of the participants to say, look, we can actually reduce the minimums because for us, the operational cost literally becomes much more manageable, if not negligible, right? And then from there, you go into like, okay, the specific product constructs, whether it's the 3C7 fund, whether it's, in a 40 Act wrapper, et cetera, those kind of get technicalities. But what we want to focus on is kind of bringing the technology to enable the growth of those products, right? Enable, kind of tapping into that $5 to $12 trillion market by all the market participants, and then just kind of driving the growth of alternatives.
Got it. I want to thank you both, Adam, Rashad, for your insight and your time today, and I hope people have enjoyed it. I think we live in really interesting times with adoption of technologies, innovative technologies. I think we're going to see more innovation and alternatives in the next 24 months than we've probably seen in the last 30 years. And Adam, I think what you're doing and paying attention to and delivering is really needed and desired by so many clients in the family office space. That's where we spend all our time, and you're hitting their concerns right on. Still, I'd love to open up to anyone in the audience that might have questions for Adam or Rashad or more information. I think you'll pass out their contact information for anybody who wants to get more color on them moving forward. And for anyone on the call, as it relates to my company, TOS, if you're bumping into innovative and creative and interesting technologies, Danielle's always really creative about reaching out and like making sure we're aware of it. Sean Parkin is as well. We want to always be learning and sitting on sort of innovative technologies and testing things. So we'd love to collaborate with anybody on here that's bumping into cool stuff.
So thank you, Ray. Great presentations and great moderation. If there are any questions, put them on chat now, for sure. So Ray, do you have any follow-up at the end, kind of a concluding message for the group?
Well, thank God we live in interesting times. There's a lot happening for us, and there's a lot going on. And technology, as it relates to family offices, is difficult, right? It's really difficult for people to feel comfortable that they made the right choices when they got something, or that their integrations actually go as planned, or the budget shows up the way that they wanted. So these are all things that, someone like Asora can help you address. I think that's remarkable. And I think that as it relates to iownit, I think everybody on this call is going to start hearing a lot about them in the coming months. And I think that what they're doing is incredibly innovative and creative. And I think that you'll see fast followers once some announcements start coming out for the adoption of them as a technology. So we're looking forward to it. We're looking forward to it because manage on these disparate investments inside of a family office is a royal pain in the neck. We have one family office that has 985 K1s. And trying to get that data, Adam, is painful. Trying to benchmark it is almost impossible. So looking at these technologies and this innovation, it's going to be super helpful to us.
So question to both is, with the volume of data, okay, how do you make decisions quickly? How do we use what you're doing to make a decision more quickly than in the past? So I'll throw that out to you, Ray, and then to the panelists, okay?
Okay, yeah. So for us, it's the ability to be able to measure something, right? And you may not be surprised that we deal with so many family offices that are in the billions of dollars that have no visibility on what's going on from a day-to-day environment. Really good friend here in Houston, Texas, who has 6 people working in his family office. And he goes, all they really do is process capital calls. I have no idea what's really going on. So leaning into someone like Adam and them is going to be super helpful. Leaning into someone like Rashad and iownit for us is going to be really understanding and being able to take the right size investments into different strategic structures, right? Because a family office isn't one big bucket of dollar signs. I know that's what we used to believe at UBS and JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs do. They look at Phil Strassler as a big dollar sign. But really what we are is a confluence of about 27 different legal entities, or in the case of one of our families, 200, right? And so being able to make those allocations to those investments will be just really, really exceptional to us when we see iownit coming into the market and giving us that flexibility to make 14 different investments into the same actual investment at KKR, but from 14 different logistical places for the right size.
I have a question for Adam. How do you think iownit's going to change your business, Adam?
Yeah, and I think the answer to that is how it's going to change family offices, right? And we view ourselves as a downstream tool for iownit to be able to get data. So we get excited about iownit and other tools like it, because it's going to give us better data, right? And for the family office, it's going to give them the opportunity to get better data. So I think especially private assets are going to change hugely in the next 5 or 10 years. A couple of things are just back to your last question, Phil. I think if you've got a structured database, that's the only way to deal with the large volumes of data. And then you get into practical things like having notifications, alerts, understanding when all those activities happen, which capital calls you want to know about on what basis, right? So once you've structured data, you can put your filter on top. And that's the real key to being able to manage it, is if it's all in one place, then you can put your own filtering preferences on top to get identified or alerted as to what it is that you view as material.
So Rashad, it looks like you're in the early innings of secondaries becoming maybe even an asset class.
Yeah, no, Phil, absolutely. I mean, I think the market is evolving, whether it's the primaries, secondaries, right? I mean, I think that we're going to see a lot of innovation coming into the market, right? Just kind of in general, there are a lot of very creative people today in the GP community that are constantly thinking about, like, how do we innovate? How do we differentiate? How do we bring an interesting and exciting structures out into the market? But I want to go back for a second to that question that you had about the data, right? And the point that Ray mentioned about, kind of having a family office with 6 people that are processing capital calls. What we found, right, at least kind of in our discussion, in our engagements, is that the biggest problem that exists today is that you actually have to constantly go search for data get the data and then try to figure out how do I normalize it, right? So there's like a whole industry around just taking the data, normalizing it, and just putting it somewhere so somebody else can come and get it and, you know, kind of get notify them that something has arrived. We believe it's extremely inefficient, right? In the way that just kind of the data is managed, because data fundamentally drives the investment decisions, drives whatever the decisions that, you know, kind of you mentioned. So I think what we want to focus on, and I think where we're very early on, but it's going to develop, is what I call the kind of uninterrupted access to data, right? Meaning, like, you know, as soon as, if I'm the producer of that data, so let's say I'm a GP or a fund administrator, etc., and I actually have the data, the capital call, etc., I can actually push it out in real time. And then anybody who is requiring that data has uninterrupted access to that data, so they can pull it at any time and get it into a fairly normalized, structured fashion that you can kind of drive it from there, right? So that is, like, you know, that uninterrupted access of data, that flow of data between the counterparties, is what then can facilitate the investment decisions and really kind of help to, you know, make those decisions more efficient, more timely, etc., and hopefully make Adam's life a little bit easier, right? I mean, like, yeah, okay, you know, if we need to present this data, where's that socket, right? Like, I need to find a socket so I can plug my TV and boom, everything just kind of comes up, right? There's got to be some electricity that, you know, kind of comes, and it's a fairly standard 110 volts. You're not going to get shocked, right? That's the structure that we need to get to, particularly in the alternative markets.
Thank you. So Ray, thank you so much. Great job. Adam, Rashad, I really appreciate your time. And the community, it's a great community. Hope to see you in October. Enjoy the rest of the summer. Bye, everyone.